Talent investing is nothing but finding those people and then catalyzing them to become founders or become exceptional founders who go on to create a bunch of value for the world as a whole. Having bias for action, being able to rally a bunch of people with you, and having the ambition to think big, I think the odds are then you're setting yourself up for success. The flawed belief system is that most people think that it's not 10%. They think it's like 80% of founding can be done by learning how to do it before actually doing it. I think the fear of failure manifests into, I don't think I'm ready, I don't know if it'll work. Fundamentally, what you're doing is those two exceptional people working together is it's not A plus B, it's A to the power of B, because you're so different from each other. Pool you start with is a curated pool of exceptional people, and you're not just starting from a group of people that you might know in your university or your close friends or in your personal network. We glorify a culture where it is okay and also encouraged to break up early if things are not working out, because you're saving yourself a lot of pain down the road.
Welcome back to Understanding VC. I'm your host Rahul. Understanding VC is a perpetual MBA on a single subject, venture capital. Today, I'll be having an in-depth conversation on talent investing with Rahul Samat. Rahul is a partner and India head at Entrepreneur First. And Entrepreneur First pioneer talent investing and backs exceptional individuals to build startups from scratch. Now let's talk to him. Hi Rahul. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Hey, great to speak to another Rahul. Nice to meet you.
Yeah, this is the first time I'm having another Rahul on the show.
Yeah, and that's actually surprising given how common the name is. So I would have figured I would have been the fifth one or the seventh one, but turns out the first one. So look forward to chatting about talent investing with you.
Yeah, yeah. So you're a talent investor. Love to know more about talent investing.
So fundamentally, talent investing is I guess, a category within the early stage investing spectrum, I guess. And on that spectrum, you've got venture capital, which is also a very early stage form of investing, and you've got accelerators, you've got VCs, and then there's this category that we call talent investing. Fundamentally, our belief is that there are people out there who are so extraordinary that if they were equipped with the right resources, with the right network, with the right community, even they could go on to accomplish remarkable things as founders. And talent investing is nothing but the craft, or the talent investing is nothing but finding those people and then catalyzing them to become founders or become exceptional founders who go on to create a bunch of value for the world as a whole. I basically look at talent investing as that phase or that category where a founder who's very ambitious and wants to maybe go on and create a lot of impact in the world but doesn't necessarily know what to build or who to build with. Working with talent investors such as EF helps them figure those very, very hard pieces of the founding journey, which is going from having the ambition to be a founder to actually becoming one, right? It's almost like the GTM of entrepreneurship or founding, so to speak. Does that help?
Yeah. Is it any similar to, let's say, a person trying to recruit a great team member?
I'd say it's actually very different from recruitment in the sense that fundamentally both recruitment and talent investing are about finding talent, right? At the end of the day. But it's very different from recruitment because, in the construct of recruitment, what you're doing is you were maybe looking for a certain employee that fits a certain kind of job or a certain kind of, I guess, skill set effectively for a very, defined job which exists in the world. Entrepreneurship is not as structured, right? Like entrepreneurship is very not just very dynamic, but it's also entrepreneurship is all about like dealing with ambiguity and uncertainty. So in that sense, the people who make for great founders who will go on to, create a lot of value in the world, those people are going to be much harder to find by virtue of the fact that you don't necessarily have a formula or a template that you're looking for. I guess what I'm trying to say is it's not as deterministic as recruitment. Recruitment, let's say if you're trying to recruit for a, I don't know, software engineer, or if you're trying to recruit a product manager, or if you're trying to recruit a marketing professional, right? Like these are roles which are very well defined and very structured. It's very deterministic, basically, the kind of expectation of that role. Founding is not the same. And so talent investors who look for exceptional people who could be founders aren't really working with a deterministic formulaic or like a very deterministic thing that they're looking for. And in that sense, it's very, very different than recruitment.
Yeah. So what is a talent investor looking for? And what makes a great talent investor in
Yeah.
your opinion?
I guess fundamentally, right, like what a talent investor is looking for is an exceptional person who could make for a great founder. And, the way startups work or the way venture capital works as well is that most of the value created in early stage company building or most of the value created by startups is actually created by a very small number of startups. So if you take all the cumulative value in the world that is created by companies that are formed, right, like newly formed companies, the power law, or think of the power law as like Pareto but on steroids, right? Like the power law defines that most of that value accumulated in that distribution actually is within a very small sample of that distribution. And venture or early stage company building actually works on the power law, where what you notice is that there are few companies that will create like outsized value in the world. And in that sense, there are few founders who actually go on to create most of the new value created in the world, basically. And so fundamentally, talent investors are essentially looking for those outliers. They're basically, trying to find and then help these extraordinary people realize what they're truly capable of and help them achieve, their full potential. And so the role of a talent investor is actually figuring out, where to find these people and also figuring out what makes them exceptional. So being able to pick an outlier from a bunch of good people, basically. And then once they have built that relationship and found that exceptional person, the role is then about catalyzing that person's potential and making sure that, that exceptional individual is actually reaching their full potential on the back of almost being like a coach to first their careers and then their founding journeys. So that's effectively what a talent investor does. And then you also asked me like what makes for a great talent investor, and I think that's a fantastic question. So fundamentally, right, like by virtue of talent investing in itself being such a new or nascent thing in the world, like EF created this category of talent investing, like about a decade ago. And so there isn't necessarily like a set path of what a talent investor might look like, or there isn't necessarily like a particular background or an industry or a qualification that actually makes for a great talent investor. And that's also because of what I said earlier, right? Like this is dealing with so much ambiguity, and by virtue of it just being such a new role in the world, you can't you don't necessarily have like a career path for it already. So talent investors don't really come from a very well defined persona or like a very specific background. But what makes for a great talent investor and what really makes the great talent investor stand out from the good ones is a set of attitudes and behaviors, right? Fundamentally, great talent investors are very, very curious. They're curious about how the world works. So they're incredibly curious about just understanding things from first principles and understanding, what makes the world tick or what makes certain businesses or technologies happen. So a high level of intellectual curiosity we've seen to be a great marker for what makes for a great talent investor. I think that's also because, fundamentally founders can go on to build amazing companies or create a lot of value in many different industries, right? Like entrepreneurship or founding is not specific to a specific type of industry, right? Like you could build a great company in any industry in the world or any sector. And so great talent investors are so curious about the world that they are consistently almost upskilling themselves on the latest technological trends or understanding like what makes a certain business work or what makes a certain industry even tick. And so that trait of being an infinite learner is something that we've seen work really, really well with great talent investors. So that's one thing that makes great talent investors. And there's a few such things that we've noticed makes for a great talent investor. I'll pause there because I've shared a lot of detail on that, and I'm happy to jump into some of the other things that make a great talent investor, or tell you a little more about the role as well.
Yeah. So the first thing that I wanted to know, I mean, this has been there only
Yeah.
for a decade, but do you think there is like a power law that's applicable to even talent
Mm.
investors? If you look at a
Yeah.
lot of VCs, a very few
Yeah.
VC funds make all
Yeah.
the money. So Do you see that sort of a pattern? Like very
Yeah.
few talent investors are able to find most of the great talent.
Yes, absolutely. And I think, the reason for that is because there are very few people who go on to actually be to create like globally important companies or generationally important companies, right? Like you only have some outliers that will go on to do that. And so by virtue of the fact that there are very few founders who will actually go on to create great things, there are also going to be very few investors. If you look at even venture works on a power law. There are very few investors that go on to, amass most of the value created in venture capital. And I think, like, by virtue of the fact that talent investing comes so early and even well before venture capital, that law applies in talent investing as well. And so we're fully convinced that there'll be some talent investors who will be the outliers of talent investing, and they'll go on to find the outliers who actually go on to then create generationally important companies.
Yeah. And what about like soft
Yeah.
skills, like the ability to connect with founders and build trust,
Yeah.
things like that? Is that important to be a great investor?
Yeah, absolutely. So fundamentally, right, I think the important thing to call out is that, the unit of investment that a talent investor is obsessing about is a person, right? It is actually an individual. It's not a company. So if you're a VC, then what you really the unit of investment that you're optimizing around is a company, right? Like that's the entity that you're trying to find. Trying to find a great company, but a great talent investor is actually trying to find an exceptional individual. And so, there's a lot of soft skills that are important. There's a bunch of hard skills as well, but there's a bunch of attitudes and behaviors that are very, very important. Great talent investors are able to build deep relationships with, exceptional people. So great talent investors are able to surround themselves with exceptional people. They're able to build the relevant networks and communities of exceptional people. They know exactly where these exceptional people aggregate. They know, how to find them. They know how to surround themselves in, groups of such exceptional people. And so that's, of course, like one very important skill. And, like I said, they're very curious about the world. So they're also very curious about what these people are working on. They're very curious about, hey, what, you know, what is a certain technological development that's happening in the world right now, which will have a massive impact in the world going forward. And that's another big key trait that makes for a great talent investor. So, if you're able to surround yourself with exceptional people, you're able to build deep relationships with those people, you're able to almost meet them at their intellectual level, or like, provide them with intellectual stimulus, then you're able to build a deep strong relationship with those exceptional people. And then by virtue of that relationship, there is the I guess license to then coach those people, right? Because fundamentally, when someone exceptional identifies that you're exceptional as a talent investor and you're able to unlock the potential they have, then they trust you and give you the license to even challenge their belief systems. And that's what it takes, right? At the end of the day, the great founders are founders who know that, you know, they have strong beliefs, but they hold those beliefs very weakly, I guess. So strong beliefs weakly held. And when you have a relationship with a talent investor who's able to almost challenge your beliefs on the basis of the fundamental trust that's built in that relationship, they're, then those talent investors, are able to challenge belief systems and almost push you or push the founder to greatness, right? Which is make that founder better every day, make that founder think far beyond and think much bigger and almost upsize their ambition in ways. And so another key, trait or behavior that makes for a great talent investor is, are you able to build that deep relationship? Are you able to almost push exceptional people to greatness by building a relationship where they're able to trust that you have their best interests in mind?
Yeah. So the key here is to do this also
Yeah.
very early in person's career, right? Like I always think, if I can find the next entrepreneur who could be like a potential like
Yeah.
Elon Musk, then my job in
Yes.
life is done.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
Absolutely. You're absolutely right, right? Fundamentally, by virtue of the phase that we operate in or that talent investors operate in, you are you're discovering this outlier, like the next Elon Musk or the next Patrick Collison or the next Sachin Bansal, right? Like you're discovering this exceptional person very, very early in their career. You're discovering them before the potential is obvious, right? Because give those people enough time and their potential will become obvious. They will, you know, by the time they get to a certain age, the world will know their exception. So a lot of the craft is actually unlocking or finding that potential when it's not obvious, when you know that these are outliers, but the world hasn't figured that out yet. And of course, when you're able to do that, and when you're also able to be one of the variables that pushes them to greatness, which is you're catalyzing the fundamental underlying potential. The potential is there, but you're catalyzing it, and catalyzing it means you're able to accelerate that person becoming the exceptional person that they were anyway going to become. By virtue of that, there is a very, very handsome reward to that, right? Because you've created value for them, for the world, and for, like, let's say, shareholders of a company like EF. And so, yeah, these are very rewarding careers. And by rewarding, I mean they're professionally rewarding, they're personally rewarding. It's very rewarding to see a founder go from, let's say, like a student you met on campus, and then, like, within a few months, see them become an exceptional founder who's raising a very large seed round and creating so much employment in the country. That journey in itself is so rewarding. um, so finding these people early is definitely the way to go, and the way this business works.
Yeah. And you also mentioned about, as a talent investor, one of the job is to figure out where
Yeah,
you can find these talent, and also the characteristics of a
yeah.
great founder. Uh, yeah. So where do you find these great
Yeah, and
talents?
that's a big piece of the talent investor role, right? So every talent investor has, like, a very, I'd say, like, unique approach to this, and a very, I guess, personalized way of going about the craft. And we're strong believers of working from first principles, just like extraordinary founders. EF also operates on that. And so, each talent investor would have a thesis around where they would find these exceptional people, and then they would go in the world and test their thesis out. And approaching it in a very first principles and thesis driven way then helps them update their mental models on, hey, you know what, I had a thesis that I would find exceptional people in this place, geography, sector, stage of life, or with these markers, etc. Like, thesis could be on many dimensions. What's beautiful about going about it a thesis driven way is then talent investors update their mental models based on what they're seeing in the world when they apply their thesis, and then they're able to update their thesis. So, where you find them, there is no straight answer. And if there was a straight answer, then this would be a very easy thing to do, and anybody in the world could do it. But this is the kind of, I guess, career path where, you're almost building a craft and building a taste for it by approaching it in a very unique way and working from where you think you'll find exceptional people. You also asked me, like, what are the characteristics of a great founder, or, like, what do talented investors look for? And again, right, like, this isn't necessarily a formulaic approach, and it shouldn't be, because we are dealing with people and their potential, and so it can't be. But fundamentally, if I were to look at all the things that we believe make for a great founder, or what we look for in talent, I think they fall into one of two buckets. The first one being ambition. So, our strong belief is that ambition is a force multiplier, right? Like, it's basically like an amplifier of sorts. Ambition amplifiers an outlier person's potential or their talent, basically. Ambition is what enables them to build at scale and to do things that most other people can't even think about or don't think is possible. And we know this because we've seen it. Like, we've seen this over and over the last decade of talent investing. So, the most exceptional founders have, like, an innate urge, or like an innate drive to achieve very, very difficult things, to build around hard problems. They have, like, this urge to, or they're obsessed basically with very big ideas. They're obsessed with making a big impact in the world. They're very, very conscious about their time in the world. And they're basically bored by, anything that's obvious, or anything that's, pretty straightforward, right? And so fundamentally, we believe that ambition is one of those vectors, and this is something that we really look for in the founders that we back. And so ambition is one vector, which we believe is a very important trait that makes for a great founder. And the other, are a set of behavioral traits, which I would bucket into what we call, like, founder aptitude, right? Like, and this would fundamentally be things such as, hey, is a founder able to, get get exceptional people to follow them, right? Like, we believe that this is a very important trait for, somebody to be able to build meaningful impact in the world, because it's very hard to build a globally important or generationally important company by yourself. So if you're not able to rally exceptional people behind your mission, then it's going to be really, really hard. And so there are a bunch of, like, I'd say, like, founder aptitude traits of sorts, or founder aptitude, I guess, behaviors, which fall into either like a set of hard skills or soft skills. And I won't go into each one of those, but you definitely see, maybe if you're if you're someone who aspires to be a CEO, we'd expect there to be some commerciality or some commercial thinking in the way you go about doing your work. Or if you're a technical builder, then there is a certain level of technical ability which gives one the confidence that you'd make a great founder. So yeah, so there's a set of, like, I guess, like, founder aptitude sort of traits, but I would definitely over index on ambition, and that is what I think is the most important, I guess, variable, or that's the most important force multiplier that differentiates the great outlier founders from the good ones.
Yeah. So personally, is there a particular trait that you think is like a sign of a great founder? Some people have this responsiveness is
Yeah.
something that a lot of people in California says as like a great sign. Is there a
Yeah.
something that you think is a sign of a great
Yeah,
founder?
I think, like, if I were to boil it down, right, I think it comes down to not just like maybe two or three that I have seen to be probably more of a deterministic, or at least more of a common denominator between some of the most exceptional founders that I've seen. I definitely think, like, being somebody who can create, like, followership of sorts, like have exceptional people who want to work with you, want to work on what you think will be a reality in the future, right? Like, founders have big visions and founders have big aspirations, but if they can't take along exceptional people with them on their journey, then I don't think they're going to be able to accomplish a lot. So I've seen that as one very, very important trait. Like, being able to have the followership of exceptional people who want to work with you is something that I think is extremely important. I think it's also very important to have, like, a level of, like, a bias for action of sorts. I've seen a lot of great founders who are very ambitious, but don't necessarily have the bias for action. And what bias for action means is, basically finding that balance between thinking and doing, right? The best founders straddle between those things. They straddle between thinking big and then, like, with bias for action, going and doing something, learning from it, and then updating what they're thinking, right? So I think, like, having bias for action, being able to rally a bunch of people with you, and having the ambition to think big. I think if you have those things as, like, core fundamental markers, I think the odds are then you're setting yourself up for success.
Yeah, definitely. It's very rare to
Yeah.
find that combination
It,
of
it's very hard. It's very hard
qualities.
because you see a lot of founders who are very ambitious but don't have the bias for action. And these are founders who will think a lot. They'll ideate, oh, the world should have X or Y, and they have great ideas, but I don't think they have the execution chops then, because the bias for action is lacking. And then there are great founders who have both but don't have followership. And then what ends up happening is you're limited by the impact you can create, because you don't have, like, a great team that's making your vision a reality, right? So I think it's very important to have all of those, and it's very hard to find all of that together.
Yeah. Yeah. So, what do you think are some of the reasons why
Yeah,
people hold back from like trying to build
yeah,
businesses?
yeah. So I've been very fortunate to have worked with a lot of founders, to have my own founding journey as well, right? So I I am somebody who can relate to this question in great measure, because I was someone who started up after quite a bit of time, right? Like, I had a traditional career. I started my career as an investment banker. I worked in finance for a few years. I worked in strategy. I did a little bit of consulting. I even worked at, like, a tech startup. And so fundamentally, right, what I've noticed is founders founders or founding in itself is a very, of course, it's a very high risk place, so it's not for everybody. But I think there are a lot of misconceptions around founding. I think there are a lot of, I'd say, like, false beliefs about about entrepreneurship, right? And coming from someone who's been a founder but also probably lived some of those beliefs, I think I can give you like some first-hand examples. So a lot of founders believe that they need a certain set of skills before they are ready to be founders, right? This is something that I've seen a lot. And fundamentally, I think the concept of being ready is a very flawed concept. In my opinion, founding is like, it's like swimming maybe, or it's like I don't like riding a bike, right? There's only so much you can learn theoretically. Like there's only so much you can prepare yourself for that, right? Till you don't sit on the bike, you don't find your balance, you're not really going to be able to ride a bike. So I'd say like you can prepare yourself for 10% of what founding will be or what entrepreneurship will be. And I think the flawed belief system is that most people think that it's not 10%. They think it's like 80% of founding can be done by like, learning how to do it before actually doing it. And so like I have spent a lot of time trying to pick up the skills or like being ready before jumping in, only to realize that you're not ever going to be ready, because there's no such thing as being ready, and the only way to do it is actually by doing it. And so I would definitely challenge the, hey, I'm not ready, this is not the right time. I think a lot of that is coming from a fear of failure as well, because fundamentally there is a lot of failure in entrepreneurship, which is why it's not for everybody. And so I think the fear of failure manifests into, I don't think I'm ready. I don't know if it'll work. I want to try doing this while having a job. And, once it works, then I will quit my job. Or what happens if it doesn't work? Will I ever get employed again? Like, I think all of this is a fear of failure that manifests into these misconceptions about founding.
Yeah, this fear of failure, I think, is a
Yeah.
big problem. In a sense, like this is what leads into like a founder trying to work on an idea for a longer than
Yeah.
he or
Yeah.
she should, and things like that, because you are not willing to accept that this something
Yeah.
is not working.
Absolutely.
And also, like, what other
Yeah.
reasons do you think fear of
Manifests
failure
into. Yeah.
kind of?
So fundamentally, right, I think the fear of failure is also a very cultural thing, right? Like it comes from which what society considers to be failure, because at the end of the day, we're very social animals, I guess, right? And so, like if you're somebody who's born in maybe born in America, you would look at failure very differently than if you were born in the East, because countries like ours, or even Far East, right? Failure at, let's say, like company building or doing something of your own is looked at very differently than in the West. In the West, actually, failure is rewarded, right? I think this is changing. This is a cultural shift that I think is happening, especially in our country. But the fear of failure does manifest into, these things such as, hey, I need to be ready, which means I need a certain set of skills, right? Like I need to first learn to do A and then B, and founders go about it in a very checklist driven way, saying, once I learn this, then I'll learn this. Once I learn this, then I'll learn this. And again, that's all preparing for the 10%. So I would not over index on that. And then, fear of failure manifests into things such as, oh, well, but if I start up and I fail, will I ever get a job again? It's going to look bad on my resume. I mean, like I would argue that starting up is actually real world experience that makes you more employable than you were before you started up, because you've actually tried something and learned a set of skills that you can't really learn in a steady job. So I don't think it makes you any less employable. It actually makes you more, if you ask me. I think you get a lot. You would be um, eligible to get a lot more responsibility if you had the experience of starting a company, of working in ambiguity. These are like very hard skills of leading a team, right? Of being responsible for maybe an investor's capital. So I think these are all great skills that make you that are very valuable. And so I don't think like not having a job or not being able to get a job should be something that I would be worried about. And then there are other I guess misconceptions about starting up. For example, like some founders believe that they don't maybe have the right network or the right access to capital. They think they may not have a network of VCs, or they don't have enough money saved up to start up. I mean, you'd be really surprised at how little it takes to get a company off ground today, and how accessible entrepreneurship is. You'd be really surprised at when it comes to even access to capital. You'd be really surprised at the appetite for risk in the world today. And it's really not that hard to raise capital. And with a product like Entrepreneur First, or with a place like EF, it's basically as low risk as it gets, because in the EF model we even have a stipend that a founder gets while they're in the program. So there's no financial risk, right? Like you're getting like a monthly stipend that covers basic necessities that you might have. And so fundamentally, right, like I think not having enough capital or not being ready or not having an idea, that's another one, right? A lot of people think that till I don't have the perfect idea I cannot start up. I think that's another like misconception, because there is no such thing as a perfect idea. I think like we have the media to blame for this, because the media almost makes the founding journey as one where you've had these eureka moments and you suddenly have a light bulb moment with an idea. Well, that's not how startups work. You actually form and develop your idea by talking to your customers, and it's a thing that evolves over a period of time, and you then build a network around your idea. You don't really have a network when you start. You don't need one actually to start up. And so I would really think about those things, because I think all of those misconceptions come from a fear of failure. And I think like we are in a world and a society now where failure is good. It actually makes you stronger. It hones your skills and many skills basically, and makes you ready for bigger professional challenges.
Yeah. The one thing that I wanted to uh, ask you is like, what do you think is the, you mentioned about the cultural
Yeah.
sort of norms, but what do you think is the role of your family and
Yeah.
your childhood? So this is something. So I listened to another podcast for founders, podcast. So the common theme among every great personality is their
Mm.
childhood. And again, I saw this tweet from Kunal
Mm.
Shah today. All exceptional success may be a coping mechanism. So you're probably a product
Yeah.
of your childhood, right? Like, so do you think that has a role?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that, I think there are certain skills, right, that make you better at the game of entrepreneurship. So, like, for starters, this is not for everybody. I don't think everybody in the world should be a founder, because it is a high risk, high reward kind of journey. It is a journey where you're dealing with ambiguity, right? So, by design, you're bringing something new in the world, right? Like you're introducing the world to something new. Even if you're building something which is, let's say, like another version of something that exists, you're still like bringing a new entity or a new brand into the world, or a new experience or a new product into the world. And that by design is hard, because like we don't like change, right? That's just human nature. So it's not easy. And so of course, I think like if you've gone through a set of journeys that resilient to be a founder, because like I guess Kunal said, coping mechanisms come from adversity. And so if you've gone through certain adversity in life that make you more resilient, or that have helped you hone a few skills that make you more resilient through this very difficult journey, I think that does set you up for success. I don't think I'd go as far as saying that your childhood will define if you'll be a great founder or not. I think it's just a set of adversity, and or not even adversities. I think it's just a set of skills. You can pick those skills up at any point. I don't think it's only your childhood. I think what happens is it's extreme in those cases, because those formative years have a big impact on who you become as a person. But we've seen great founders who had very good childhoods and like become exceptional founders, because they have the ambition to be a great founder. So I don't think you need to have an adverse childhood, but I do think that being resilient is one of those very, very important traits. And so whatever helps you get there, including like experience or even a strong education, could set you up for success.
Yeah, I don't think adverse situation help you
Yeah.
beyond a certain level, because when somebody starts to do well, a lot of adversities
Yeah.
just go away, right? Like,
They
but then
continue to do
like
well.
you still
Yeah.
need the ambition,
Exactly.
yeah, to continue to,
Exactly.
yeah. And you mentioned about this is not
Yeah.
for everybody. So how should somebody decide whether it's a right?
Yeah. So, as I mentioned, right, I don't think entrepreneurship is for everybody, because fundamentally, it requires a certain level of being comfortable with risk, or, being okay with ambiguity, etc. Right. I think it's the sort of thing which you discover when you actually take a shot at it. I don't think anybody should subscribe to it, without actually taking a proper shot. Right. So you could theoretically argue that, hey, can I be a founder after spending a decade in a startup, right? Like that could be one argument someone could make. Does that make me ready to be a founder, or does that prepare me to be a founder? or does that tell me what it's like, right? I think it helps in the sense that, being around other founders is obviously going to rub off in ways in which you pick up what it takes to be a great founder. So I think there is some value in working at maybe a startup, let's say, or around exceptional founders. There's definitely some value in that. But I don't think, that working at a startup is necessarily founder practice. Let me put it that way, right? Because the only person in that startup who actually learning how to be a founder, not even is a great founder, is the founder itself. So you might go to a high growth startup, and you might even be at a very late stage pre-IPO startup. Well, guess what? That founder is also going through a journey where they're still learning. They're still learning what it takes to be a founder. And so I think there's insulation when you're in those roles. You might be working at a seed stage startup or a Series A startup, but it's the founder's responsibility to insulate you from a lot of the what they are dealing with, right? Which could be, hey, is there enough capital for this business to thrive, right? Do we have the right talent to make this work? Do our customers know, what problems we solve for them? Are we solving those problems in a way where our customers are finding and deriving enough value? That's the founder's role, right? Like to figure those things out, and so much more. And so you're insulated from that. You might go and work at a startup and you know be an entrepreneur inside the startup, but well, guess what? You don't really then raise any capital, right? Like you're getting that capital because the founder has gone out and raised that capital. So fundamentally, what I'm trying to say is that I don't think it's for everybody, but I also don't think you can figure this out till you actually give it a shot. And I think the best way to figure if it's for you or not is to find the least friction way to give it a shot. And by least friction, I mean the paths that will have the least impact to you, whatever trajectory you're on, right? If you're able to find out in a reason, like if it doesn't take you a few years to figure if this is for you or not, then I think it's a no-brainer, right? Like if you can figure this out in 6 months. If I told you, hey, Rahul, you have 6 months in which you'll be able to figure out if this is for you or not, if you're cut out for it, if you enjoy doing it or not. And guess what? If it doesn't work out, you'll be back on whatever path you were on. I doubt you will become obsolete in 6 months. It's very unlikely that in 6 months the world doesn't value your skills, whatever you had before you started out. But if I told you it's not 6 months, it's 6 years, now suddenly, there is a risk involved in even trying. So I think the best way to test is to find these low friction ways. And like, I'd love to talk about EF because that's one such way. But these low friction ways in which you can test for yourself if it is for you, because if it is for you, then you're possibly on the path to doing the most rewarding work of your entire life. You're on the path possibly, to figure your life mission or your reason to be, right? Or your purpose in life. You could be on the path to that, and that's not something that all of us are lucky to even discover in a lifetime, let alone in 6 months.
Yeah. And one of the major points of friction in building something is like
Yeah.
finding somebody with complementary skill set, right? Like, and I've heard so many people say that that is the USP of
Mm.
EF from
Yeah.
people who have like been in the program. So yeah, but internally, do you think that that's the value proposition of
I think that's
EF?
one of the value propositions. I wouldn't say it's the only or the most unique one. I guess the way I would look at it is, I think the first question to ask is, do you need a founder? Like, do you need a co-founder? Right? That's the first. If I was looking at this from first principles, my opinion on that, or my experience of seeing great founders around me on that, is that by virtue of how hard this is, or by virtue of just how intense the journey is, and also by virtue of the diverse set of skills that you need to take a new thing or a new company or a new product off the ground, it's very hard, or it's very taxing for one person to do justice to the skill set that's required, and also the intensity that it comes with. Entrepreneurship has a lot of highs and a lot of lows. Having been a founder myself, I can tell you that there are days where within a few hours you go through like an emotional roller coaster, where in the morning you're like, that's it, like this is it, we're going to be very successful, this is the next best thing after sliced bread, like that's it, we're on it. And in like 2 hours you're basically, you feel doomed, you feel like there is absolutely, like you question why you're doing this, like you ask yourself why you're putting yourself through such a hard thing. And then maybe later in the day you're back again on the emotional high. So this is not easy, basically, right? to have somebody with you who's just as vested, because keep in mind, your co-founder is going to be in the business as vested as you are, emotionally, financially, mentally, like they're just completely all in. There are, you won't share that relationship with your investors. You will definitely not share that relationship with your employees. You won't share that relationship with your family even. But to have somebody who is in it with you as a true partner, it goes a long way in dealing with the adversity. And then, of course, what it also means is it makes the intensity a little better, right? Because you're not expected to do everything, right? Like you could divide and conquer and have be with a co-founder who's complementary to your own skill set. Keep in mind, it's also really hard for like one person to have all the skills needed to, build a great product and sell it. And so, if you're strategic about who you work with, then you could be complementary in ways in which you're greater than the sum of your individual parts, and your co-founders making you both more than 2x productive basically, right? And that's, I think, where it's important to have a great co-founder, and I think it drastically increases the odds of starting up and being successful at it. When it comes to EF, I think, at EF we found a very structured way in which we enable this, because it's so important. It's a very structured way in which we help people figure who the right complementary co-founder for them is. Help them understand, like, is that co-founder actually pushing you to greatness? Are they making you the best version of yourself, right? Are you greater than the sum of your individual parts? So we've got a very structured way in which we do that. And also, I guess, like, the most important thing in this aspect is, if you're convinced that you need a co-founder, you want the best co-founder in the world for you, right? Like, you don't necessarily want to pick the first person who's available in your network, or they may not necessarily be the person who is the right co-founder for you. So EF does that as well, which is, like, fundamentally puts together this room of 30, 40, 50 individuals who are possibly the most ambitious and exceptional people in the country. And so when you are in that peer group, you're basically getting access to potentially the best co-founder for you, not the best from who you know on your own.
Yeah. So, I think I've heard you mention this, that when you have a co-founder, it doubles
Yeah,
your productivity. Is that something that you've internally
yeah,
gauged? Like, so why
yeah.
is that? Is it because of the support that founders have from each other plus the complementary skills, or is there something more
Yeah,
to
so
it?
see, fundamentally, what's happening is you are a product of your experiences. And imagine, if you're an exceptional person, you have a certain set of experiences, you have a certain set of skills that you're great at. If you're paired up with another person who's a product of different experiences and brings a very different perspective to the table, is complementary to your skills, and is vested with you in the journey, is maybe somebody who shares the same value system. So you have the same belief, let's say, like, in how to go about building a company, or what kind of behaviors you want to see from yourselves and your employees, or have the same level of ambition. Fundamentally, what you're doing is, those two exceptional people working together is, it's it's not a plus b, it's a to the power of b, because you're so different from each other. And that's where it's important to be complementary. We've seen productivity be multifold. It's not even 2x. It's far more. And I think the best measure in this is when you see a single founder and the pace at which they progress, the kind of value they create. You can even quantify, like, what kind of value you'd create. To see that in multiple single founder journeys and multiple, like, dual founder journeys where it's exceptional co-founders, it's drastically different. It's worlds apart, basically.
Yeah, I'm very curious to know your structured
Yeah.
process in matching
Well, it sounds like you
founders.
should come join one of our programs, because that's the best way to find out. But here's how I would look at it, right? Think of our process as an iterative way to go about team building and company building. Like I said, very first principles in our approach. We're very thesis driven. And so fundamentally, we help, let's say you're a founder who joins one of our programs, you're now surrounded by, you're now in a room and a peer group of 40, 50 other exceptional individuals. These are probably some of the most ambitious individuals in the country, who are all ready to start up, as in their intent to start a company right now is very high. So then none of them are doing this part-time. In fact, a lot of them have actually left very significant opportunities to be in that room. They've given up some jobs, or given up the ability to publish more papers, or given up like very important things in life to come and spend a few months to build companies. So you're in this peer group of exceptional people who all want to create value in the world. And then fundamentally, by being in that peer group, you're also constantly, your ambition is being upsized because you're surrounded by others who are consistently, doing great work. So you see that, and the inspiration and the second order effects of that are incredible. The process is that you'd spend some time with some of the people in that group of, in that room or in that cohort, and you'd go about iteratively testing out teams and testing out different businesses. Some people find the perfect co-founder for them in their first attempt, where they work with one person over a few weeks. Some people take 4 attempts, some people take 7. But what happens is, in each iterative attempt of team building, they gain a lot, and they gain firstly about themselves, like they learn things about themselves as founders, but they also learn a lot about what they're looking for in a co-founder, or what actually complementary skills truly mean, right? Like where does the complement actually happen? They pick this up. So every team that's formed is formed on the cumulative strength of what you've learned in the process for. So it's a very iterative approach to company building and to finding the right co-founder for you. But the fundamental of it is, the pool you start with is a curated pool of exceptional people, and you're not just starting from a group of people that you might know in your university or your close friends or in your personal network.
So the initial pairing, is it something like a person who can build and a person who can sell, pairing them up?
Well, that's one format that works really well, because those are two core fundamentals of what's needed in the early stage. So, yeah, you do see some pairings that are on that journey of, hey, there's somebody who is more commercially minded and there's somebody who's maybe more technical. And so that's a pairing that works, but that's not the only pairing that works. We've seen like we've seen two technical co-founders as well who, end up being co-founders or teammates basically, and they end up doing great things. um, some of them along the way pick up the skills that they might not have because they have a strong growth mindset. So I wouldn't say there is necessarily like a guidance around this. What's most important is to work with somebody who is pushing you to be the best version of yourself. Like, you might have the most complementary skills, you may actually be very aligned in your value systems as well, but if you're not able to push each other to be greater every day, right? If you're not able to have hard conversations, then we've seen that those teams don't necessarily go on to do world changing things, because it takes like a certain level of, it takes a certain, you need to be operating with very high ambitions, and you need to be operating in a place where you're able to do justice to hard problems, and it happens by pushing each other.
Yeah. What about things like the
Yeah.
values that they have as a person? Is that like a thing that you've seen founders look at each
Yeah,
other?
I mean, I think at the end of
Like
the day, right, like it's a value system is important, not just individually, but also to the kind of company you want to build, right? So if two founders have very different ideologies, right? Like, for example, let's take an example. If one founder has an approach where they're very conscious about the capital or the way they spend their capital. Let's say if they're they oriented in a way where they want to optimize and like, spend money in a very different way than another founder who believes that the way for their business to succeed is actually by them spending a lot of capital and maybe attracting a certain kind of customer, or like standing out and breaking from the clutter, right? uh, by spending capital. Like, these are just, there's no one right way, it's just different ideologies. So it's kind of like in a marriage, right? Like, if you don't agree on how you want to manage your finances, it's going to be very hard for the couple to be in a successful marriage. And so, how founders want to behave in their companies, what kind of behaviors they want to set as examples for their employees, how they want to go about building their company. If those are not aligned up, then those don't make for strong teams. And fundamentally, I think what ends up happening is, when there's no value alignment, those teams or those companies will eventually reach a point where they will break. It's like a bad marriage, basically. What EF does beautifully is it front loads all of that, which means if you're going to discover 3 years later after you raise a lot of money and you have all these customers that you actually cannot work together, that is going to hurt you and cost you a lot more than if you discover that in 2 weeks of working together. So internally at EF, we actually glorify having these hard conversations. We glorify a culture where it is okay and also encouraged to break up early if things are not working out, because you're saving yourself a lot of pain down the road. And we celebrate this, and that's why it's an iterative way of team building, because a lot of founders will end up, going through 4 or 5 team breakups before they find the founder that works for them.
And what about the stage of life where the founder is, one
Yeah.
person is single, and young, and one person is, older plus
Yeah.
with family.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. Like, I think, fundamentally, life stage is a very important factor in how you go about building your company, right? I think the older you are, maybe, you've got a set of responsibilities, you've got a family, possibly, you've got aging parents. And I guess the younger you are, you have more freedom, maybe by design, right? Because your life is in a place where your choices are just your own. You aren't necessarily as dependent on other people. So, one way in which, and so to answer your question, these are very important things that actually matter a lot when people, pick their co-founders. And I think, one way in which EF structures this in our products as well is that we've got a graduate product or a graduate cohort, for example, which is just early career individuals. Like, you wouldn't find anybody in there who has more than a couple of years of experience. And that's a very different cohort and offering from, let's say, what we call our core product, because, that's folks who have more experience. And what you'd see is very different types of companies. But what you also then by design see is that people who are in one cohort are in a very similar life stage, have a very similar appetite for risk, are able to take decisions which don't impact their, anybody except themselves. For example, in a graduate program, it wouldn't be surprising for us to see some of our founders pair up with founders in other countries, because it's easy when you're 23 or 22 to relocate to another country and build a company in another country, or for, let's say, like a founder from another country to come and build a company in India. That's much harder to do when you're in your mid 30s, for example, right? So yeah, it is an important thing that people consider.
Yeah. And EF was in Singapore. They're no longer in Singapore, but when they were, it felt like, EF was mostly about trying to build
Yeah.
tech startups. uh, would you agree?
I think fundamentally, we don't have a sectorial thesis. So, we don't go about curating our cohorts in a way where, like, there's no design that says, we need 20% deep tech or 30% consumer or, 40% healthcare. Like, we don't really go about cutting our cohort design that way, or even curating our business in that manner. Our thesis is very simple. Like, we work with exceptional people who will be exceptional founders. What they build is really up to them. We're not a venture studio that gives them an idea. Like, they will ideate, right? Like, EF would equip them with the relevant framework to help them figure what they should be building, where they have an unfair advantage, where they have a certain right to win. But we wouldn't give that to them, basically. So what ends up happening then, Rahul, is that, you would see that maybe in Singapore, for example, there's a very thriving deep tech ecosystem, right? So people who are living in Singapore, who go to universities there, are exposed to others who built those kind of companies, or they have access to talent and early employees that are skilled in those ways. And so that's really a more a ecosystem playing out in a way where you might see that EF companies also reflect to what the local ecosystem is, but it's not by design such that EF would only build deep tech companies. So, for example, even in our portfolio in India or globally, we've got a very diverse portfolio. We of course have software, and we've got, most of our portfolio is software. But even within that, you'll see like AI companies, you'll see blockchain companies, you also see like deep tech or hardware plays. We've got like space tech companies. We have a company in Paris portfolio which does plant-based bacon. So that's a very different business than, let's say, like a London company that's doing AI generated human like voice, for example, right? So those are very different plays, and those are very diverse plays. And that's because we don't really have a thesis. And so we wouldn't have one for Singapore or India as well.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
one last question. So you mentioned about your two programs, one for
Yep.
graduates and one your core program is for older experienced folks. For these two sort of different sort of
Hmm.
talents, right? Like, why do you think EF or like EF sort of program should be their go-to build strategy
Yeah.
sort of thing? Because they could just apply for an
Yep.
accelerator or go work with a venture studio or many other
Absolutely.
things or build on
Yeah.
your
I
own.
think.
Like,
Yeah. I think that's
why?
a great question. So,
And for
yep.
both sets of founders, right? You have these young founders and also these
Absolutely.
experienced
Absolutely.
folks.
So I think, it's fundamental to realize that the EF product is for folks who are early in their founding journey. So what I mean by that is, oftentimes a lot of the founders who join our programs are pre-idea. They haven't even figured out what they will be building. Like imagine, right? They know that they want to be a founder. They know they have the ambition and the aspiration to be a founder. We know that they have the potential to be a great founder, but they haven't necessarily figured out exactly what they're going to build. They haven't necessarily figured out who they're going to work with, right? Like these are pieces that they still have to figure out. And our worldview is that the journey to go from the ambition to being a founder, and actually even getting to, let's say, like a founding team that has a certain idea, right? Like if you're applying to an accelerator, you're likely applying as a team. You're applying with, at the very least an idea and possibly with some product and some traction, right? Like the what an accelerator brings to is it accelerates your journey. It takes a company which has maybe some basic traction or has an idea of what they want to build. Oftentimes it's two founders or a small team, and it accelerates their journey. Our belief with EF is that we come in when you haven't reached that stage. And actually, our worldview is that a lot of people don't ever get there because it's so hard to go from the ambition to being a founder and even getting to that stage of having a team or a concept or an idea or, like a product. And that's where EF comes in. So you would choose EF mainly because you're so early on in your journey and you're trying to figure what is the impact I can make in the world. Like what is the true realization of the impact I can create, right? Traditionally, culturally, we're all told that, hey, there are these certain jobs that are, the jobs that are, traditionally meant to be mapped out to successful lives, right? This is just cultural norms, right? Like back in the day, maybe in the 70s or 80s, you should have been a doctor for you to be successful and create impact in the country or in the world. And now, like maybe 5 years back or 10 years back, that was more like being an investment banker or, working in finance or working in consulting. Today it's probably go work at like a tech, big tech company. So that's traditionally what cultures have told you is successful paths. What EF believes is that that's not the only way to make impact in the world. In fact, I would argue that that's an ambition dampening way to make impact in the world. The way we believe you can make impact in the world is by being an entrepreneur who can create those jobs instead of taking one of those jobs, right? And move the world and the, your country forward. And so fundamentally, you join the program, either the graduate program or the core program, because you're somebody who is not satisfied with the status quo. You're somebody who you believe is an outlier and you're not okay with doing the obvious, what the world has told you you need to do. You're restless, in fact, to actually go on and create impact in the world, outsized impact, basically, because you have finite time here. And EF is the vehicle to make that happen. Because what EF does is it puts you in a room with other people like that. It puts you in a peer group that you've probably never seen in your life. And what that does for your own ambition and what that does for your own personal development, like, is transformational. I've seen people join that room and in 6 months become unrecognizable to who they were. So if that's the kind of professional and personal development you aspire to have in your life, then EF is the right program for you.
The commonly held belief is that people who go on to build great companies are so compelled by wanting to solve a
Yeah.
particular problem that that's the reason, right? Like, then it's kind of also telling that you don't actually need a catalyst in this case of EF. So
Yeah.
but you're saying that um, there is still value for being a
Yeah.
catalyst.
So I'd look at it this way, right? Oftentimes, it's very hard to figure out what that is, right? Some of us might know what that is, but the hardest part is to actually figure what that is, right? Like it's very, very hard to figure what is that thing that you obsess about, or what is that thing where you can add outsized impact to the world. What is that thing that you have a certain right to win in, right? unpacking that in a way which is a structured approach to get there is one of the hardest things where you need catalyzing. You actually need someone to guide you through that. And you need someone who's not, you know, emotionally in your head, right? Like you need someone who's almost like almost like a coach to you, right? Like you need like a personal impact coach, let's say, right? Like who is pulling that out of you, right? And that's what a talent investor does. They help you figure what is that thing that you'll create outsized impact on, and then like to be able to catalyze your potential to get there, because it's not just knowing what it is, but then it's also like figuring out how to go about it. It's figuring out to go about it in a way where you've not spent 5 years or 10 years getting there. It's about making that opportunity a reality while it's still an opportunity, because you could maybe figure that out on your own in 5 years, but odds are that there's another company that has gotten there faster, right? So it's a bunch of those things, and that's what talent investing or a talent investor would do for you.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess the problem here is that I've never had needed any nudge, so I can't really relate to, yeah, such a person.
Yeah.
But yeah,
You're one of the lucky few,
maybe
I
in
guess, because I know personally myself as well. Oftentimes I might have like a want to win. So what I mean by that is I might know that I want to build this or I want to do this because, it excites me and I feel a lot of value in that. But a want to win is very different than a right to win, which is, hey, actually, where can I actually create outsized impact? And if those two match up, that's the ideal place to be in, but they don't always match up.
this was great. Thank you so much for taking the
Oh,
time to
my
do
pleasure. It
this.
was lovely talking to you, Rahul, and great to spend this time today. I'm happy to maybe sync up again and chat again in the future and tell you a little more in the future about what we do, and maybe reach more audiences of yours, because I'm pretty sure that even if one of them realizes that, hey, guess what? I actually relate to what Rahul has said, in that I want to go and create outsized impact, and I want to figure out how to go and do that in a way in which I'm going to be able to figure that out with like others who will upsize my ambition. I think then we would have done a great job today.
Yeah, yeah, we should do this again in future.